It was pretty spectacular. Everyone was worried. Hey everyone, welcome back to Breadbox Racing and 4x4. This weekend I'm out in the shop working on the Porsche again, and I thought, hey, we should take a look at why these air oil separators fail. They're a notorious source of problems on these cars, and I'm curious what exactly is inside of here that's so special, and let's get our eyes on why they fail, and maybe there's a way we can make these things a little bit better. Because it definitely failed for me this year and sent a slug of oil through the engine, which damn near hydrolocked it. Okay, so you can see it's pulled apart here. We've got a couple pieces. This is the oil separator portion of the air oil separator. This is the infamous valve that sits up on top like that. So let's go through where the crankcase fumes go. The way this is set up, this port goes to your block, as does this one. We've got this port right here. Your crankcase fumes come in here and here. They travel up inside this reservoir here and then out this port that I just showed you in the back here. Fumes come in, flow up, flow in at an angle, and swirl. While they're swirling, the oil deposits onto the outside of this canister, flows down back into the crankcase. So this is actually an extremely good way of filtering out oil. There's really nothing mechanical to go wrong on this part. So why do they fail? Well, there's two reasons in my opinion. And the first one is that valve on top, which is, you guessed it, mechanical part. The second one is a matter of sheer volume of oil flow. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But the first thing, let's take a look at this valve. This part on top has two ports. You've got your inlet and your outlet. Now this one comes back to your intake. And this one, the bottom one, sits on top, controls airflow through here. Okay, so how's this valve actually controlling crankcase pressure? In normal operation, when you have positive crankcase pressure, this valve, or the spring, sorry, holds this diaphragm open so that gas can flow up from the oil air separator and freely go into the center and out into your intake manifold. In high vacuum situations, this diaphragm pulls shut. What we can do here is we can use compressed air to simulate the same kind of conditions, because this just works on differential air pressure. So we can simulate a vacuum on this side of the diaphragm simply by increasing the pressure on the other side. So if I take my compressed air and blow it into this port here, we don't get a positive seal, but we get enough of a seal for the vacuum has now overcome spring pressure. This outer ring seals against this face, and then it becomes the job of this smaller valve to make smaller, to allow smaller amounts of gas through. So that's it. Normal operation where you have plenty of crankcase pressure, gas can flow freely in, through the center, and out that way to your intake manifold. When you're under essentially idle, or say you've been going wide open, you snap the throttle shut, you're gonna have a ton of vacuum. This valve will shut to prevent high amounts of flow through the oil separator, because your engine has momentum. It's going to try and pull air from wherever it can get it. In this case, if you snap the throttle shut, intake manifold's going to see a ton of vacuum. Sucks this diaphragm out, sealing this outer ring to the other side of the valve. And it then becomes the job of this little guy here. This guy opens, so it'll allow a little bit of vacuum through into the crankcase, but not too much. That's essentially how this operates. You can think of this valve as a crankcase vacuum restrictor. It puts a limit on how much vacuum the crankcase can see. And that may be in an effort to prevent the engine from ingesting a ton of oil really fast. So we can see that's why this valve part fails. And we can also see why measuring crankcase pressure, aka vacuum, is a good way of checking this valve. The valve, if you have too much vacuum, that means your valve is not regulating it properly. So, the valve design, there's not really anything bad about it, but I also think there's maybe better ways that could have been done. It's what we're stuck with though. Now, the other way these fail, I mentioned it earlier, is volume of oil flow. Now, and why is that a problem? Well, at the bottom, you have an outlet, and that outlet has a diameter, and it's relying on gravity to drain it back. Last time I checked, force of gravity is always the same. But there's two other factors, namely oil temperature. Hotter oil is runnier, it's going to flow out more easily. But also, if you're turning, this thing does not run straight down. It comes down a bit and then runs into the block at an angle. And that angle happens to be pointed towards the left side of the car. So if you're going around a tight left turn, there's a force that's going to be pushing against the oil running down out of the oil separator. So your flow rate will be reduced on a tight left-hand turn, especially a prolonged one. That's the big reason why these things will occasionally send a slug of oil through the engine, I think, is if you're on a tight left-hand turn, your engine's doing a ton of RPM, putting a lot of crankcase vapor through that separator, there are scenarios where it could build up oil faster than the oil is able to run out. And then when that valve actuates and it tries to pull a whole bunch more crankcase fumes, what happens? Well, you get a slug of oil. So what I propose, the best way to fix it, A, make sure your oil separator is in good condition. I think it's actually probably pretty well designed to do that job, except for very specific use cases where it will cause problems in a predictable way, but not one you can really say exactly when it's going to happen. If you race the same track a lot, you may notice on a certain corner it will tend to do it, that kind of thing. So in terms of fixing the oil flow problem, really the only thing you can do is have an engine that doesn't make crankcase fumes, which will never happen. More realistically, you could put a catch can between the outlet of the valve and your intake. It would have to be a big enough catch can that it can accommodate a big slug of oil entering without it getting sucked up into the other side. So you might have to have some baffles there, but that's really the only way I can see that you'd be able to fix the problem. And of course, after a track session or something, you're going to have to check that oil catch can and potentially either drain it and replace the oil or drain it back into the block. It is what it is, right? Okay guys, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. You know where the like button and subscribe button are. If you like the video, you know what to do. If you didn't, well, there's the other button for that. And I do listen. If I see a bunch of people go, boo, you suck, I won't do as many of those videos. We've got lots coming up on the Porsche. We're doing a bunch of work to the engine, freshening things up that are high mileage, and just kind of giving you a once over, as well as a couple performance things. I'm probably going to do another tear down of the transmission, give it a health check this winter, and then of course we've got to put the car all back together. So if you enjoyed this, thanks for watching, and have a great day. Bye.